I found out my savings were stolen the same night my mother hosted a dinner party to show off a life she couldn't afford. And the worst part? She smiled at me across the table while doing it. If you've never had a toxic mom, you probably think I'm exaggerating. I used to think that too. I used to defend her. I used to believe every explanation, every excuse, every carefully crafted version of reality she fed me, until the bank app told me a different story. I'm 32. I work in healthcare administration. Not glamorous, not flashy, but stable. For 7 years, I lived carefully. No spontaneous vacations, no designer bags, no luxury car. I rented a modest apartment and packed my own lunches. I said no to brunches, no to impulse shopping, no to anything that threatened the number in my savings account. Because that money had a purpose. It was my safety net, my future down payment, my proof that I would never be financially dependent on anyone again. Growing up with a toxic mom teaches you one thing very early: security isn't given. You build it yourself. My mother has always cared deeply about appearances. Not happiness, not stability, appearances. We grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in the suburbs, but you'd think we lived in a mansion the way she talked about our lifestyle. She'd host elaborate dinners on a credit card, buy clothes she returned after wearing them once, drop hints about imaginary promotions my father never received. She curated life the way influencers curate Instagram feeds. And when my dad finally got tired of the constant financial deception, he left. I was 16. She told everyone he abandoned us. She never mentioned the maxed out cards or the loans he didn't know existed. I learned early to separate truth from her version of truth. Still, she was my mom. And when she started struggling financially last year, I stepped in. At first, it was small things, groceries, utilities, just until I get back on my feet, honey. I didn't question it. I had savings. I had stability. I could help. What I didn't know was that helping her would slowly blur into something else, something darker. She began asking more detailed questions: how much I had saved, where I kept it, whether I'd ever considered investing differently, whether my account was just sitting there. I should have recognized the red flags. But when you're raised around financial deception, it becomes background noise. You tell yourself you're imagining it. You tell yourself she wouldn't do that to you. The night everything changed was her birthday. She insisted on hosting. She said she wanted to prove to her friends she was doing just fine. There were catered appetizers, expensive wine, a new dining table I'd never seen before. I remember thinking it didn't add up. I remember opening my phone in the bathroom, mostly out of habit, and that's when I saw it. Multiple transfers, large ones. My balance wasn't just lower, it was nearly empty. My first thought wasn't panic, it was confusion. My second thought was a phrase that made my stomach drop: savings stolen. And somehow, deep down, I already knew who had taken them. I stared at my phone for a full 30 seconds before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. 3 transfers, 3 of the same amount, $12,840, nearly $42,000 gone. My hands went cold. I checked the account number the money was sent to. It looked unfamiliar, but the bank app showed something that made my throat tighten. The transfers were initiated from a device already verified, a device connected to my profile. I didn't want to think it, but my mother had helped me set up online banking years ago when I was in grad school. She'd insisted on being my emergency contact. She knew my email, she knew the answers to my security questions. Because the security questions were about her: favorite childhood pet, mother's maiden name, city I was born in. All roads led back to her. I told myself there had to be another explanation, maybe fraud, maybe hacking, maybe I was overreacting. But as I stood there in her bathroom, marble countertops, new gold fixtures I knew she couldn't afford, the word financial deception started echoing in my mind. This wasn't random. This was planned. I walked back to the dining room in a daze. Her friends were laughing, complimenting the decor, talking about her incredible resilience after the divorce. One woman even said, "You've landed on your feet beautifully." My mother lifted her wine glass and smiled modestly. I just made some smart financial moves. Smart financial moves. The phrase hit differently now. I watched her hands, perfect manicure, diamond bracelet I'd never seen before. She caught my eye across the table and gave me that look, the one that said, "Don't embarrass me." And that's when I realized something terrifying. She wasn't worried. If my savings were stolen without her involvement, she'd be panicking with me. She'd be dramatic, loud, outraged on my behalf. Instead, she was calm, because she already knew. I waited until her guests left. It was past midnight when I finally spoke. "Mom," I said carefully, "did you access my bank account recently?" She didn't even flinch. "What? Of course not. Why would I?" "There were transfers, large ones." She sighed like I'd accused her of something ridiculous. "You're always so anxious about money. It's unhealthy." That was her first move. Minimize, redirect, make me doubt myself. "I'm not anxious. $42,000 is missing." She paused then just for a fraction of a second. Then she leaned back in her chair. "Oh, that. Oh, that." Like I was asking about a borrowed sweater. "I meant to tell you," she continued smoothly, "I needed to move some funds temporarily. It's an investment opportunity. High return, very safe." "You moved my money?" "It's not moved, sweetheart. It's working for us." "For us." My pulse pounded in my ears. "You didn't ask me." "I'm your mother," she said, her tone sharpening. "Everything I've ever done has been for you." There it was, the guilt, the rewriting of history. Classic toxic mom logic. "You had that money just sitting there. I'm helping it grow. You're welcome." Helping. My savings were stolen and she was reframing it as generosity. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about realizing that the person who was supposed to protect me had built her entire identity on financial deception, and I had finally become part of the illusion. But I didn't yell, I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I asked one question. "What account did you send it to?" And for the first time that night, she hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. It was small, barely noticeable, but I've spent my whole life reading her micro-expressions. The slight tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers curled around the wine glass. "What account?" I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "It's complicated," she said quickly. "You wouldn't understand the structure." The structure. More vague language, more smoke. "Try me." She stood up and began clearing plates that didn't need clearing. Movement was her defense mechanism. If she kept busy, she didn't have to answer. "It's through a private investment group. A friend of mine connected me." "What friend?" "You don't know her." "Then introduce me." Her back stiffened. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "This is exactly why I didn't want to stress you out with details." Stress me out? $42,000 gone, and I was the dramatic one? "I didn't give you permission," I said. "That's not investing. That's my savings stolen." She spun around at that. "Don't use that word. It makes me sound like a criminal." "If it looks like one—" "Stop it," she shouted. The sudden volume made me freeze. She rarely lost control. She preferred manipulation over confrontation, so when she raised her voice, it meant she was cornered. "I carried you for 9 months," she said, pointing at me. "I sacrificed everything, and now you're accusing me over money?" There it was again. The debt she believed I owed her simply for being born. "This isn't about sacrifice," I said quietly. "It's about consent." She laughed. Actually laughed. "You've been reading too much therapy language online." My chest felt tight. This was the breaking point. Not the missing money, not even the financial deception. It was the absolute refusal to acknowledge reality. "You accessed my account without asking. You transferred my savings. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not support. That's control." Her eyes hardened. "You wouldn't even have that money if I hadn't pushed you to succeed. You're welcome." And in that moment, I saw it clearly. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. To her, my success was an extension of her brand. My savings were a resource. My boundaries were negotiable. Classic toxic mom pattern. Rewrite history, claim ownership, deny harm. "Is the money even invested, or did you spend it tonight?" Her silence answered before she did. The new dining table, the catered food, the bracelet. "You used it," I whispered. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, a small portion. I deserve to enjoy my life too." Small portion? $42,000 was a small portion? I felt dizzy. The room looked different now, like I was seeing behind the curtain of a stage set. The illusion cracked. "Where's the rest?" I asked. "It's fine," she said quickly. "I'll pay you back." "When?" "When the investment matures." "What investment?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. And that's when the final truth landed. There was no investment. There was no private group. There was no high-return opportunity. There was only a lifetime of financial deception, and I had just become the latest source of supply. My savings were stolen to impress people who would forget her next week. I expected to scream. Instead, I felt something colder. Clarity. Because for the first time, I wasn't a confused daughter trying to decode a toxic mom. I was a woman who had just been robbed, and I wasn't going to handle it the way she expected. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just nodded slowly and said, "Okay." She relaxed immediately. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what okay really meant. When I said okay, my mother visibly relaxed. Her shoulders dropped. Her tone softened. "I knew you'd understand," she said, stepping closer like we had just resolved a minor misunderstanding. "You're always the reasonable one." Reasonable. That's what she called me when I didn't challenge her. I gave her a small nod, calm, controlled. Inside, something had shifted permanently. Because this wasn't just about savings stolen anymore. It was about a pattern that had shaped my entire life. The gaslighting, the guilt, the constant financial deception disguised as maternal sacrifice. And for the first time, I wasn't going to argue my way through it. I was going to document it. The next morning, I called the bank, not to scream, not to report fraud, just to ask questions. Very specific ones. I asked for timestamps, IP addresses, device verification logs. I requested written confirmation of how the account access was approved. The representative was polite, thorough, and when she told me the transfers were authorized using my security credentials, including correct answers to identity verification questions, I felt something settle into place. Proof. Not emotion, not assumption. Proof. My savings were stolen using information only my mother would know. I didn't confront her again. Instead, I changed everything. New passwords, two-factor authentication linked only to my phone, security questions she could never guess. Then I did something she would never expect. I scheduled a consultation with a financial attorney. I didn't tell anyone, Not friends, not coworkers, especially not her. The lawyer listened carefully as I explained the situation. I used neutral language, no dramatic labels, just facts. Unauthorized access, large transfers, no written consent. He didn't call her a toxic mom. He called it potential financial exploitation. Hearing it phrased that way made my stomach turn. But it also validated what I already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was calculated financial deception. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to force accountability, to expose everything. But another part of me, the strategic part, knew that impulsive action would only give her time to spin the narrative. She thrived on drama. So I said, not yet. Instead, we discussed options: formal demand letters, asset tracing, legal repayment agreements, quiet steps, controlled steps. If she thought I was going to scream and then forgive her like always, she was wrong, because this time I had leverage. I went home that evening to find her browsing furniture websites. "Thinking of upgrading the guest room," she said casually. "We're entering a new phase of life." We. There it was again. I smiled politely. "That's exciting," I replied. She looked pleased, confident. She had no idea that the bank had flagged her receiving account, no idea that the transfers were traceable, no idea that her illusion was already cracking. That night, I reviewed the account statements again. The money hadn't gone to an investment firm. It had gone to a personal checking account. Her personal checking account. No business entity, no third party, just her. My savings were stolen to fund a lifestyle she couldn't sustain. Classic toxic mom behavior. Create a fantasy, force others to finance it, deny responsibility when questioned. But I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to let her dig deeper, because the more comfortable she felt, the more reckless she would become, and reckless people leave trails. The silent revenge had begun. She just didn't know she was already losing.
For the next 3 weeks, I played the part she wanted. Supportive daughter, mildly concerned but trusting, still reasonable. It wasn't difficult. I had decades of practice surviving a toxic mom. What she didn't realize was that I was no longer reacting emotionally. I was observing and documenting. Every time she mentioned the investment, I asked small, neutral questions. When does it mature? What's the projected return? Is it short-term or long-term growth? She answered vaguely every time. "Oh, it's structured. It's diversified. You wouldn't understand the technical side." The more she talked, the clearer it became. There was no investment, only escalating financial deception. Meanwhile, I was gathering everything: the bank's verification logs, the transfer confirmations, screenshots of her messages where she referenced moving the money. I even recorded one conversation, legally in my state, where she admitted she borrowed my funds without telling me because I would have overreacted. Borrowed. That word would matter later. Then something unexpected happened. She got bolder. 2 weeks after the dinner party, she mentioned hosting another gathering. Smaller this time, she said, but I noticed new decor arriving at the house, expensive pieces, custom lighting. I checked the account she'd transferred the money into. The balance was almost gone. Not invested, spent. My savings were stolen and evaporated into candles, wine, and validation from women who barely cared. That night, she asked me something that nearly made me laugh. "Do you think I should refinance the house?" she said casually, "just to free up some liquidity." Liquidity. She was running out of other people's money, and now she was circling back toward me. "I think you should be careful," I said evenly. "Debt can spiral fast." She waved her hand dismissively. "You worry too much. Everything works out for me." That sentence told me everything about her worldview. Everything works out for me because someone else pays the cost. I met with my attorney again the next day. This time I brought the full paper trail. He reviewed it quietly, nodded. You have a strong case, especially with the recorded admission. The room felt very still. This qualifies as unauthorized access and financial exploitation. If you proceed, she will be legally required to repay you, possibly with penalties. Penalties. I imagined her face when the illusion cracked publicly. Her friends, her carefully curated image, all built on financial deception. I said, "Draft the demand letter." We structured it professionally, no emotional language, just facts. Amount taken, evidence attached, 14 days to arrange repayment or face formal legal action. I didn't send it immediately. Timing matters. Instead, I waited for her next party. The house was full again, laughter echoing down the hallway. She looked radiant, floating from guest to guest, telling stories about strategic investments and smart positioning. At one point, she raised a glass and said, "I've always believed in taking calculated risks." Calculated. Yes. That night, after the last guest left and she began stacking plates, I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. "What's this?" she asked lightly. "Something calculated," I replied. She opened it slowly, and for the first time since my savings were stolen, I saw real fear flicker across her face. Not anger, not manipulation, fear, because the fantasy had just met documentation, and documentation doesn't argue, it proves. She looked up at me, pale. "You wouldn't," she whispered. I held her gaze. "Watch me." She read the letter twice. The first time, her lips moved silently. The second time, her hands started shaking. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "You're threatening your own mother?" "I'm asking for my money back." "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious." The room felt smaller than it ever had. The expensive candles she'd burned for ambiance now smelled suffocating. "This will destroy my reputation," she whispered. And there it was. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I made a mistake." Reputation. The performance mattered more than the damage. "My savings were stolen," I said calmly. That already destroyed something. She tried a different tactic. Tears. They came fast, on cue. "I was under pressure," she said. "After your father left, I had nothing. I had to survive." "That was 16 years ago. You don't understand what it's like to be alone." I understood exactly what it was like to feel alone. I just didn't use other people's bank accounts to fix it. "You had no right," I said quietly. "That's not survival. That's financial deception." She flinched at the word. "You're making this sound criminal." "It is criminal." Silence. Then came the final weapon in the arsenal of every toxic mom who feels cornered. "You owe me," she said coldly. "You gave me life." "No, you gave me trauma. I built the rest myself." That was the first time I had ever said something like that out loud, and it felt freeing. The next 2 weeks were tense. She tried everything. Angry texts, guilt-ridden voicemails, long emails about family loyalty. I didn't engage emotionally. Every response was simple and written. "Please refer to the letter. Repayment deadline is stated clearly. Further communication should remain documented." The attorney had advised consistency, and consistency is kryptonite to manipulators. Word must have started spreading among her social circle, so one afternoon she called in a panic. "Did you tell anyone?" she demanded. "No." "Well, someone mentioned legal trouble. Are you trying to humiliate me?" I hadn't told a soul, which meant she had. People who live by financial deception often expose themselves when they scramble to control the narrative. 3 days before the deadline, she asked to meet. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe. She looked smaller somehow. The confidence was gone. "I can't pay the full amount right now," she admitted. "But I can liquidate some assets." Assets. So there had been money, just not where she claimed. "How much?" "Half immediately, the rest in structured installments." Structured. She loved that word. I slid a prepared repayment agreement across the table. My attorney had anticipated this exact scenario. Interest included, clear timeline, automatic legal escalation if missed. She stared at it. You planned this all. Yes. For once, she wasn't the only one thinking ahead. My savings were stolen, but I wasn't going to let the story end there. She signed. Not gracefully, not proudly, but she signed, and in that moment the balance shifted. For the first time in my life, her choices had consequences, not emotional ones she could spin, legal ones she couldn't. As we stood to leave, she looked at me differently, not like a daughter, like an equal, or maybe even a threat. "You've changed," she said. "No, I just stopped ignoring the truth." The karma wasn't explosive, it wasn't dramatic, it was paperwork, accountability, loss of control. And for someone who built their identity on control and financial deception, that was devastating.
The first repayment hit my account exactly 6 days later. $21,000. I stared at the notification longer than I expected to, not because of relief, but because it felt symbolic. For the first time in my life, my mother had followed through on something that didn't benefit her image. It wasn't generosity, it was obligation. My savings were stolen, but now they were returning, slowly, methodically, under legal pressure. And that pressure began changing her world in ways she hadn't anticipated. A week after the first transfer, one of her friends, Diane, ran into me at a grocery store. She hesitated before speaking. "Your mom's been under a lot of stress," she said carefully. She mentioned some financial misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. That word again. I gave a polite smile. "I'm sure she did." Diane shifted uncomfortably. "She said you two are working it out privately." "We are," I replied, "through legal documentation." Her eyebrows lifted. I hadn't meant it as a threat, just a fact. But facts travel fast in social circles built on appearances. Over the next month, I noticed subtle changes. Fewer dinner parties, no more new furniture deliveries. The bracelet disappeared. When your lifestyle is funded by financial deception, sustainability becomes fragile. Then came the missed installment. It was 3 days late. I didn't call, I didn't text. I forwarded the notice to my attorney just as the agreement outlined. She called me that evening in a panic. "Why would you escalate this?" she demanded. "I just needed a few extra days." The contract states automatic notice after 72 hours. "You're treating me like a stranger." "No," I said calmly. "I'm treating you like someone who stole from me." Silence. Then something shifted in her voice. Not anger, not manipulation. Exhaustion. "I didn't think you'd go this far," she admitted quietly. That sentence mattered, because what she meant was, I didn't think you'd hold me accountable. Growing up with a toxic mom, you're trained to absorb impact quietly, to smooth things over, to prioritize peace over justice. But peace built on financial deception isn't peace, it's silence. The next day, the installment arrived, with interest. And then, something I didn't expect happened. Her house went up for sale. No dramatic announcement, no party to frame it as a new chapter. Just a listing online. The mortgage, I later learned, had been heavier than she'd implied. The refinances, the hidden credit lines, the illusion had been cracking long before my savings were stolen. My legal action hadn't ruined her. It had removed her final safety net. And without access to my money, the numbers simply stopped working. She moved into a smaller townhouse across town. No chandelier, no grand dining room, just normal. We met once after the move. She looked different, not defeated, quieter. "I'm downsizing," she said, as if testing the word. "Okay." She studied my face. "You really would have taken me to court." "Yes." Another long pause. Then she said something I never expected to hear. "I didn't think it counted as stealing." That was the closest she would ever come to an apology. For her, admitting confusion was the same as admitting fault. "My savings were stolen," I said gently, "whether you meant it that way or not." She nodded once, no argument, and that's when I realized something powerful. Karma doesn't always look like public humiliation. Sometimes it looks like losing the illusion you built your identity on. And for someone who thrived on financial deception, reality is the harshest consequence of all. It took 8 months for the full repayment to clear, 8 months of scheduled transfers, 8 months of quiet accountability, 8 months of watching numbers return to where they should have been. When the final installment hit my account, I expected fireworks, closure, triumph, satisfaction. Instead, I felt calm. My savings were stolen, yes, but what I got back was more than money. I got clarity. Our relationship didn't magically heal. We still talk, carefully. There are no more shared passwords, no more blurred boundaries, no more late-night emergencies that turn into financial requests. When she brings up money now, I redirect the conversation. If she hints at struggling, I recommend financial counseling. If she mentions opportunities, I say, "That sounds like something you should research independently." No anger, no lectures, just boundaries. Growing up with a toxic mom wires you to confuse love with obligation. You believe helping is proof of loyalty. You believe silence keeps the family intact. But silence is what allowed the financial deception to continue for years. The hardest part wasn't recovering the funds. It was accepting that she might never fully understand what she did. A few weeks after the final payment, she invited me over for coffee at her new townhouse. No catered food, no performance, just 2 mugs on a small kitchen table. "It's quieter here," she said. "Yes, I've been budgeting," she added, almost awkwardly. I nodded. "I should have asked you," she said finally. There it was, not a dramatic apology, not tears, but acknowledgement. For her, that was monumental. "My savings were stolen," I replied softly, "and it changed how I see things." She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just looked tired. And for the first time, I saw her not as a villain, not just as a toxic mom, but as a woman who built her identity on image because she never learned how to build security. That realization didn't excuse the financial deception, but it helped me release the anger. I moved forward with my plans. I found a small condo 6 months later, used my restored savings for the down payment, signed the papers myself. No cosigner, no shared access, no hidden strings. Standing in that empty living room on closing day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not because my money was back, but because my boundaries were solid. People sometimes ask me if it was worth it. The legal process, the tension, the fractured image of family? Yes, because accountability isn't cruelty, it's clarity. My savings were stolen, yes, but I refused to let that define me as a victim. Instead, it defined my standards. And here's what I've learned. You can love someone and still refuse to fund their dysfunction. You can forgive without forgetting. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't dramatic at all. It's simply refusing to participate in the lie. So let me ask you something. If the person who raised you crossed that line, if your savings were stolen by someone who claimed it was for your own good, would you protect their image or would you finally protect yourself?